Hello, my name is Janine Turner, founder of Constituting America. Welcome to Constituting America's annual academic study entitled History Holds the Key to the Future, or as Shakespeare said, the past is prologue. This year's study is The Genius of America, a Journey into Our Republic, a study on Alexis De Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Reconciliation is who we are. It is part of the American identity. And in fact, the American identity is the focus of de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Horace Cooper. This essay is based on the readings from Democracy in America. The chapter is entitled Government by Democracy in America, pages 326 to 348. The Position of the Black Race in the United States by Horace Cooper. Alexis de Tocqueville uses his keen insights and talents for observation to focus on the question of slavery and blacks in the newly created United States of America. Near the end of his essay on this topic, he once again demonstrates the prescience and perception that he has revealed throughout the book, Democracy in America. In this essay, he predicts slavery's demise. He explains at the end of the essay, quote, "Whatever the efforts of Americans of the South to preserve slavery, they will not succeed at it forever. In the midst of the democratic freedom and enlightenment of our age, slavery is not an institution that can endure," end quote. Indeed, slavery ended in the United States. It proved incompatible with the remarkable ideas of our founders, including the foundational principle that, quote, "all men are created equal," end quote. The end came about as the result of the most consequential war that this nation had ever experienced. Greater and more deadly for Americans than World War I and World War II. Certainly greater than the losses of the Revolutionary War. The Civil War cost more American lives than any war the U.S. has ever been involved in. Ultimately, freedom and abolition came at a very high price. 160 years later, we'd all be well served to remember that cost. After World War I and World War II, America made peace with her enemies, particularly after the evils committed by Japan, Germany, and Italy. Our nation's reconciliation abilities are quite pronounced. Today, Japan is a leading trading partner. Germany and Italy are too. In fact, many Americans proudly proclaim their desire for German and Italian automobiles as a sign of their financial success in life. After armed conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq, America poured hundreds of billions of dollars to help rebuild. But ironically, today there is a growing movement to foment discord over a military conflict that occurred more than a century and a half ago, the Civil War. This wrong-headed approach isn't just antithetical to who we are as Americans, but it hinders our efforts to progress as a nation. Reconciliation is who we are. It is part of the American identity. And in fact, the American identity is the focus of de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Notably, de Tocqueville doesn't take on the persona of an abolitionist in this essay. He attempts to do what he had done in other essays, observe and report. When he wrote this essay, de Tocqueville sought to explain the curious phenomenon of the existence of a, quote, free North and a, quote, slave South. One of de Tocqueville's most stringent observations is that the race of slaves in the 18th and 19th century created one of the biggest challenges to ending it. He explains that as a concept, slavery imposed on any and all races would be easier to abolish precisely because it so directly attacks the notion of the humanity of man, all of them. A slave could be your brother or sister. But having slavery focused on blacks, however, while it still denigrates the notion of the equality of man, it doesn't do so in the same broad manner. He further observes that as a consequence of singling out the slave by race, the notion that there is something unique about whites being free and blacks being slaves is easier to maintain. He says by only using blacks for slaves in America, quote, they made a wound in humanity less large, but infinitely more difficult to heal, end quote. De Tocqueville adds, quote, the remembrance of slavery dishonors the race, and race perpetuates the remembrance of slavery, end quote. But to de Tocqueville, the harm of slavery in America was obvious to even the casual observer. He argued that it explains the culture of industry in the North and the culture of indolence in the South, showing just how remarkable the differences in lifestyles are for the North and the South. De Tocqueville describes the dissimilarity of life on both sides of the Ohio River. He explains that the Ohio River, named by Native Americans, translates to beautiful, and indeed it was. The climate on both sides of the river, he reports, was, quote, temperate, end quote, and the soil on each side offered, quote, inexhaustible treasures, end quote. And yet on one side was Kentucky, a, quote, slave state, and on the other, Ohio, a, quote, free state. The two sides of the river reveal to de Tocqueville a significant difference in economic and productive activity. Ohio was more prosperous and active. Kentucky was less populated, less developed, and more causal about economic activity. This difference provided a practical reason to oppose slavery. For de Tocqueville, this prosperity and productivity difference is endemic to the existence or lack thereof of slavery. He even suggests that the scope of government activity can be explained by the presence of slavery. For instance, in Ohio, he notes that the state government established a canal between Lake Erie and the Ohio River, allowing commerce all the way from Europe to New Orleans. By contrast, he explains that residents of Kentucky have quite neither zeal nor enlightenment, end quote, and consequently, state activity reflects a more lackadaisical response. Thus, in de Tocqueville's theorizing, the existence of slavery is the primary reason why those who lived in the South languished in economic stagnation and those who lived in the North prospered. On the Ohio state side of the river, free men had to exercise agility and use willpower to provide for themselves and their family. And since they could keep the benefits of their efforts, they were more inclined to do so. On the Kentucky side, it was the responsibility of slaves to provide for their owners and owners' family. The slaves worked, but not with the zeal that comes from personally benefiting from their labors. He concludes that separate and apart from the morality and dignity of all human beings being free, his practical observation was that free men would be more prosperous overall, and society would be better served by that prosperity. But mere practical benefits, de Tocqueville feared, would not be sufficient to cause the South to end its reliance on slave labor. Cultural mores might be too hard to overcome. He feared that the physical appearance of blacks would mean that integration into the broader society would be a real challenge, even if the South considered ending slavery. In the end, America did live up to its founding principles and ended slavery. This wouldn't be a shock to de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville often spoke of America being a melting pot, a place where intermarriage and non-segregated living became commonplace. But he was apprehensive as to whether that would work to resolve the issue of race relations caused by the existence of race-based slavery. Indeed, there are those today who are, quote, racialist, end quote, who use the physical appearance of people to divide Americans, some for financial gain and others for political gain. Notwithstanding these efforts, here in the 21st century, de Tocqueville might be quite impressed with the ability of Americans of all races to live together in harmony. Today, in a country, by size, the third largest on the planet, nearly 20% of all U.S. marriages are interracial. The U.S. is among the more diverse nations on the planet. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Asians were the fastest growing ethnic group last year. And as of 2017, some 15% of all children born were mixed race. On the whole, America has demonstrated quite the ability to thrive together despite the existence of large ethnic groups. In conclusion, de Tocqueville recognized the ills of slavery and how it contradicted the values of our founders. He saw both practical and philosophical rationales for it to end. He takes care to note that his traveling companion, Gustave de Beaumont, was preparing a book on the status of blacks in the U.S., which de Tocqueville heartily recommended. America was created by the adoption of an amazing concept, the equality of all men and self-government by its citizens. So fascinated was de Tocqueville, he traveled to America to study it. Even while seeing the evils of slavery, de Tocqueville could see so much of the wonder of this magnificent plan of a republic governed not by rulers but by citizens. His hopefulness ultimately has been borne out. We have a remarkable and enduring republic, but, as Benjamin Franklin warns, only if we keep it. This essay was written by Horace Cooper. Horace Cooper is a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research and chairman of Project 21, the Black Leadership Network.